deep beneath the frozen peaks of the Swiss Alps. Something was never meant to reopen. But now, the secret gates have finally opened. Something is coming back to life. They're not looking for a vacation. They're not hiding from the world. They're relocating their entire lives, moving underground permanently. This isn't a bunker anymore. It's the birth of a brand new world, a world built to survive the coming storm, completely independent from the old one. And they are far from alone in this. Every single bunker is interconnected, forming a complex and hidden network, monitoring everything from the shadows. Because they don't fear collapse. They have been expecting this for years. At first, it looked like a minor electrical anomaly, nothing more than a brief flicker in the grid. But then, the signals went dark at the busiest intersections. Confusion began to spread through the streets. Just a glitch, they said, a temporary disruption in an otherwise perfect and unbreakable system. Then the system stopped answering altogether. The digital handshake was suddenly and violently severed. Communication lines were cut. The invisible threads that hold our world together began to fray and snap. And suddenly, everyone felt it. The weight of the silence, the growing realization that something was very wrong. The glow of the screens was no longer a source of information, but a haunting reminder of what was lost. This isn't local anymore. It's spreading through the infrastructure like a virus, reclaiming the night. Entire cities are being plunged into total darkness. The digital age is coming to a grinding and silent halt. But deep underground, within the reinforced walls of the hidden Alpine facilities, nothing breaks. The elite continue their lives in serene stability, untouched by the chaos unfolding on the surface world. Then everything stops. The final surge of power fades away, leaving only the cold, dark silence behind. On the highways, the lights of the old world have gone out. Only the desperate remain on the move. One by one, the monuments of our digital civilization are going dark. The lights are finally going out. A silent, powerless city, a haunting reminder of how fragile our connected world has always been. It's not about comfort anymore. It's about access to the resources that mean the difference between life and death. Patience is wearing thin as the lines grow longer and the supplies of the old world continue to vanish. The cost of survival is rising every second. The system is no longer providing for the many. Fear is the new currency. In the darkness of the fuel stations, the true face of the collapse is revealed. And just like that, you're alone. The connection you once took for granted has been permanently severed. The airwaves are filled with nothing but static. The voices of authority have been silenced by the digital storm. People are desperately reaching out into the void, hoping for a signal that will never come back. Connection lost. The global network has fractured into a million isolated and terrified pieces. Because when systems fail, people change. The rules of the old world no longer apply in the dark. The pressure of the collapse is bringing the long-hidden tensions of society to the boiling point. Order is being maintained with a heavy hand, but the shadows are growing longer and more dangerous. The realization of what is happening is finally hitting home. The world we knew is gone forever. And somewhere, they're not reacting. They've been waiting for this moment from the very beginning. They are watching the world burn from the safety of their monitors, their plans moving into the final phase. For them, the collapse is not an end, but a necessary correction, a shift in the balance of power. They are watching, and they are ready to step into the void left by the old world's failure. When it's over, the noise disappears. The frantic energy of the old world has been replaced by a heavy silence, and something else begins. A new way of living in the quiet aftermath of the digital storm. Survival is now a communal effort. The small acts of kindness are all that remains of our humanity. The world is quiet, but it is not free. The presence of the new order can be felt in every shadow. Not collapse, but replacement. The old systems are being swept away to make room for the new ones. The community is being reorganized. The flow of resources is now being controlled by a different hand. New markets are forming in the ruins of the old. A different kind of economy is taking root in the darkness. The infrastructure is being rebuilt, but it is no longer being built for the benefit of everyone. And then control comes back, the networks are coming back online, pulsing with a new and different energy, but not the same way. The new world is a world of barriers, checkpoints, and constant surveillance. Every movement is being tracked. Every individual is being verified by the systems of the new order. The chaos has been replaced by a cold and calculated order. The transition is now complete. Because power didn't disappear, it merely moved into the hands of those who were prepared to take it. The global system is being synchronized. The elite are now in full control of the information and the power. The lights are coming back on across the world, but they are shining on a brand new and different reality. The restoration is complete. The new order is active. The world has been permanently transformed. They didn't prepare for the end of the world. They were far more strategic than that in their planning. They prepared to control exactly what comes after it. The silence was just the beginning of their reign. And in the new darkness, their light is the only one that remains shining. The transition is final. The old world is gone. The new order has begun. There is no going back to the way things were. High above the world we know, where silence dominates and visibility disappears into clouds, a hidden system has always existed, built in secrecy, buried in stone, designed for the end of everything. But these bunkers were never meant to be seen again. And yet, they are opening, not for war, but for something far more calculated, because the people moving into these mountains are not running from the future. They are preparing to outlive it. On the surface, nothing appears unusual. Switzerland remains quiet, stable, untouched by chaos. But beneath this calm, movement has begun. Convoys arrive without announcement. Ownership transfers without records. Locations once sealed are now active again. And those entering these mountains are not tourists. They are decision makers. Individuals who see the world differently because they are already planning for what comes next. Deep underground, the architecture begins to change. These corridors were built for endurance, not comfort. Cold concrete, reinforced steel, absolute isolation. But now, transformation is underway. Old military systems are being replaced, new technology is being installed. And spaces once designed for soldiers are being redesigned for a different kind of resident. Not temporary occupants, but permanent survivors. Because this is no longer a bunker. It is becoming a controlled world beneath the surface. What was once a war shelter is now evolving into something unexpected. Luxury, hidden beneath layers of rock. Self-sustaining ecosystems replacing emergency rations. Artificial sunlight replacing the outside world. Every detail engineered for long-term survival without ever needing to return to the surface. This is not fear-driven design. This is strategic living. A closed environment where time, resources, and safety are completely controlled. Because the goal is no longer survival for weeks, but survival for years. These bunkers are not isolated from the world. They are connected to it in ways few understand. Encrypted communication systems link them globally. Private networks operate beyond public infrastructure. Even in total collapse, these locations remain online. Because control is not just about protection, it is about information. And those inside these bunkers will not be cut off from the world. They will be watching it, tracking it, and potentially controlling what remains of it. Preparation is not theoretical anymore. It is operational. Supplies are being moved in at scale. Energy systems are being secured. Access is tightly controlled. Every detail is calculated, every entry point monitored. This is not a precaution. This is execution, a system being activated step by step with precision that suggests one thing. They are not preparing just in case. They are preparing because they believe something is coming. The most revealing detail is not the bunkers themselves. It is the people entering them. Billionaires, founders, power brokers. Individuals who have access to the best information on Earth. People who see patterns long before they become visible. And they are not investing in cities or expansion. They are investing in retreat, a controlled retreat, designed to preserve not just life, but influence. Because even underground, power does not disappear. It simply relocates. As the doors close, the world above continues unaware. Markets fluctuate, conflicts rise, systems strain under pressure. But beneath the Alps, a different reality is taking shape. Silent, controlled, prepared. And those inside are no longer part of the system above. They are separate from it, protected from it, waiting for whatever comes next. Because if the most powerful people on Earth are choosing to disappear underground, then the real question is no longer why. The real question is, what do they see coming that we don't? Access to this world is not granted. It is earned, verified, and controlled at every level. Layers of authentication replace traditional security. Biometrics ensure that only a select few can enter, and once inside, there is no simple way out. This is not just protection from the outside world. It is containment of everything within, because the value stored here is no longer just wealth. It is continuity, the preservation of power in a world that may not remain stable. Hidden beneath layers of rock, a second world of data is being secured. Private servers store information that cannot be risked outside. Financial systems, strategic intelligence, digital identities. Everything that defines modern power is being duplicated and protected underground. Because in a digital collapse, whoever controls data controls recovery. And these bunkers are not just shelters. They are vaults for the future itself. The deeper you go, the more the illusion changes. This is no longer a survival environment. It is a carefully engineered lifestyle. Comfort replaces urgency. Luxury replaces limitation. Every space is designed to remove the feeling of confinement. Because the greatest threat underground is not danger. It is psychological collapse. And these environments are built to prevent it, to simulate normal life, even when the world above is no longer normal at all. Self-sufficiency is no longer optional. It is essential. Food is grown within sealed environments. Water is recycled continuously. Air is monitored, filtered, and controlled. Every resource is managed with precision, because reliance on the outside world is no longer part of the plan. These systems are designed to function independently for extended periods of time, not days, not weeks, but potentially years. A closed loop of survival, engineered beneath the surface. Protection does not stop at the entrance. Inside, security becomes even more sophisticated. Every movement is tracked. Every corridor monitored. Defense systems operate automatically, responding faster than any human could. Because once inside, this environment must remain secure at all costs, not just from external threats, but from internal instability. Control is absolute, and every system is designed to maintain it, no matter what happens above ground. While life continues below, the world above grows increasingly unstable. Economic systems fluctuate unpredictably. Conflicts expand beyond borders. Information becomes harder to trust. And signals of disruption appear more frequently, more intensely, more globally connected than ever before. For most people, these are isolated events. But for those watching from inside these bunkers, they form a pattern that suggests this is not temporary. This is the beginning of something larger. Decisions are not being made in public anymore. They are being made here, far from visibility, far from accountability. Strategies are formed in silence. Future scenarios are calculated with precision. And the people making these decisions are no longer reacting to the world. They are positioning themselves ahead of it. Because in times of uncertainty, those who prepare early do not just survive, they define what comes next. One by one, the doors continue to close, not just physically, but symbolically. A separation is forming between those inside and those still living above. And with every system activated, every supply secured, every layer sealed, the distance between these two worlds grows wider. Because once everything is in place, there may be no reason to come back up. And if that moment arrives, the world will not realize what has happened until it is already too late. What began as reactivation is now expansion. These bunkers are not simply being restored, they are being extended far beyond their original design. New tunnels are carved deeper into the mountains. Additional chambers are constructed in secrecy. Capacity is increasing rapidly. This is not preparation for a small group. This is scaling for something larger, a network, not a single shelter. And the pace of construction suggests one thing: time is running out. Energy is the backbone of survival. Without it, everything fails. These facilities are now equipped with independent power systems, generators capable of running for extended durations, backup systems layered over primary systems, redundancy built into every level, because failure is not an option here. Every light, every system, every breath depends on uninterrupted energy. And these bunkers are being designed to function even when the world outside goes dark. What appears isolated is actually connected. These bunkers are not standalone structures. They are part of a larger network, spanning multiple regions and continents. Communication lines link them in real time. Data flows continuously between locations. Coordination is centralized, yet distributed. This is not a backup plan. This is an alternative system, a parallel infrastructure, ready to operate independently of the world above. Inside these vaults, resources are being stored with extreme precision: food supplies, medical equipment, rare materials, essential technologies. Everything required to sustain life and rebuild systems if necessary. Nothing is left to chance. Inventory is tracked, rotated, and secured. Because survival is not just about shelter, it is about continuity, the ability to maintain structure, even when everything else collapses. Access is not unlimited, entry is selective, controlled, calculated. Not everyone who can afford it is allowed inside. Spaces are assigned based on value, influence, and strategic importance. Because this is not just a shelter, it is a curated environment, a controlled society and built in advance. And once entry is granted, the system closes behind you. There is a moment when preparation turns into commitment, when doors stop opening and start staying closed. And inside these bunkers, that moment is approaching. Lockdown protocols are not theoretical, they are tested, rehearsed, ready. Because once activated, there is no quick exit, no easy return to the surface. Only the system, and those who chose to trust it. Only the system, and those who chose to trust it. Health is another critical layer. Underground life requires complete medical independence. Facilities are equipped for emergencies and long-term care. Specialists operate within controlled environments. Supplies are secured for extended use because isolation brings risk. And any system designed for survival must also be capable of preserving life internally, even when external help no longer exists. The pace is accelerating. What once moved slowly is now happening rapidly. Systems are being completed faster. Supplies are increasing in volume. Movement is becoming constant because whatever timeline exists, it is shortening. And those preparing here are no longer acting cautiously. They are acting urgently, as if the window to prepare is closing. As if the window to prepare is closing. Life underground begins to change perception. Days are simulated. Time becomes controlled. The outside world becomes distant, almost abstract. And gradually, the idea of returning begins to fade, because comfort replaces urgency. Safety replaces uncertainty. And within this controlled environment, a new normal is created. One that does not depend on the surface anymore. One that does not depend on the surface anymore. Above the mountains, the world continues, unaware of what is being built beneath it. But below, a system is nearing completion, self-sufficient, secure, and ready. And those inside are no longer preparing, they are waiting for the moment when preparation becomes necessity. Because when that moment arrives, these doors will not open again, and the world above will have to face what comes next without them. At the core of every bunker, there is a system that controls everything: environment, security, communication, all centralized into a single command structure. This is where decisions are executed instantly, where data becomes action, and where control is absolute. Because in a closed world, every variable must be managed, every outcome predicted. This is not survival by chance. This is survival by design. This is survival by design. Power does not disappear underground. It follows those who control it. Financial systems are being secured within these walls. Digital assets, private reserves, strategic wealth structures. Because even in collapse, economics will return, and those who maintain control over value will shape what comes next. This is not just about survival. It is about dominance after survival. This is not just about survival. It is about dominance after survival. Inside this environment, nothing is left unobserved. Every movement is tracked, every behavior analyzed, systems learn patterns, predict outcomes, and respond before threats fully emerge. Because control here is not reactive, it is predictive. A system designed to stay ahead, even in isolation. Because the greatest risk is not always outside. Because the greatest risk is not always outside. Because the greatest risk is not always outside. While stability is engineered below, instability grows above. Signals of disruption become harder to ignore. Systems strain under pressure. Confidence begins to crack. But inside these bunkers, none of that chaos exists, because separation has already been achieved. Two worlds, moving in different directions. One unpredictable, the other controlled. Two worlds, moving in different directions. One unpredictable, the other controlled. One unpredictable, the other controlled. This is where the real strategy unfolds, not in public forums, not in visible institutions, but here, in silence. Plans are not reactive, they are anticipatory. Future scenarios are mapped in detail, outcomes calculated long before they occur. Because those inside these bunkers are not waiting to adapt to the future, they are preparing to shape it. Because those inside these bunkers are not waiting to adapt to the future, they are preparing to shape it. Because those inside these bunkers are not waiting to adapt to the future, they are preparing to shape it. Life continues, even in isolation. Routines are established, normalcy is recreated, and over time, the underground becomes familiar, comfortable, predictable, safe. Because the system is designed to replace everything lost above ground. And slowly, the idea of the outside world begins to feel distant. And slowly, the idea of the outside world begins to feel distant. And slowly, the idea of the outside world begins to feel distant. Everything is now in place. Systems are tested, protocols are verified. Every layer of the bunker is operational. There are no missing pieces, no unfinished elements. This is no longer preparation. This is readiness. A complete system waiting for activation, and once activated, there is no turning back. A complete system waiting for activation, and once activated, there is no turning back. And once activated, there is no turning back. Then comes the silence, the moment before everything changes. No alarms, no chaos, just stillness. Because the system does not react emotionally, it waits. And those inside understand that silence. They know what it means. Because they have prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Because they have prepared for this moment long before it arrived. Because they have prepared for this moment long before it arrived. And then, the separation is complete. The world above continues, unaware that something fundamental has changed. Because beneath the Alps, a different reality now exists. A controlled system, sealed from the outside. And those inside are no longer part of the world we know. They are waiting for the moment when everything shifts. Because when it does, they will not be reacting. They will already be ready. Because when it does, they will not be reacting. They will already be ready. They will already be ready. While the bunkers beneath the Alps are being sealed, the world above continues to move at full speed. Cities remain active, systems remain connected, and life appears unchanged. But beneath the surface of this normalcy, something deeper is shifting. Global systems are no longer stable in isolation. They are interconnected, dependent on each other in ways that amplify risk. Because when one system begins to fail, it does not stay contained. It spreads. Modern civilization depends on constant movement. Supply chains operate continuously, linking countries, industries, and economies. Every product, every resource moves through this global network. But this system was never designed for disruption at scale. It functions efficiently, only when everything works perfectly. And when one link breaks, the impact is not local. It becomes global, because everything is connected. Behind physical systems, there is another layer: digital infrastructure. Every transaction, every communication, every decision relies on invisible networks. These systems process billions of interactions every second. And yet, they are more fragile than they appear because they depend on constant stability, continuous power, uninterrupted connectivity. And if that stability breaks, the effects are immediate. Financial systems operate at speeds beyond human reaction. Markets shift in milliseconds, billions of dollars move instantly across borders. But this speed creates vulnerability, because rapid systems leave little room for correction. A single disruption can cascade through the entire system. Confidence can disappear just as quickly as it appears. And once confidence is lost, stability follows. Because modern finance is not just numbers, it is belief. At the same time, geopolitical tensions continue to rise. Nations compete for resources, influence, and control. Military presence expands across key regions. Strategic positioning becomes more aggressive, because in uncertain times, power becomes more visible. And when multiple powers move simultaneously, the risk of conflict increases. Not necessarily intentional, but inevitable. Resources are becoming harder to maintain. Water levels fluctuate unpredictably. Agricultural systems face increasing pressure. Energy demand continues to rise. But supply does not always match demand. And when essential resources become unstable, the impact spreads quickly. Because modern systems depend on consistency. And when consistency breaks, so does balance. This is not a single crisis. It is multiple pressures converging at once. As pressure builds, systems begin to show signs of strain. Infrastructure operates closer to its limits. Small disruptions become harder to contain. Recovery takes longer, and stability becomes more fragile, because complexity increases risk. And when multiple systems are pushed simultaneously, failure becomes more likely, not sudden, but progressive. A gradual breakdown that accelerates over time. And this is what they see, not isolated events, but connected patterns, signals that most people ignore or cannot fully understand. Because from a distance, everything still appears manageable. But from inside these bunkers, the perspective is different. The data tells a different story, one of convergence, acceleration, and inevitability. And that is why they moved underground, not out of fear, but out of certainty. The difference is not access to resources. It is access to information. Predictive models now analyze patterns across multiple systems, economic shifts, climate signals, geopolitical movement, all combined into unified projections. And these projections are no longer theoretical. They reveal trajectories, paths that systems are already moving along. Because when enough data aligns, the future becomes less uncertain and more inevitable. Entire cities can now be simulated digitally, every system modeled, every variable tested. Scenarios are run repeatedly, exploring outcomes before they occur in reality, from infrastructure failure to economic collapse to resource shortages. And across these simulations, patterns begin to repeat, not exact events, but similar outcomes, because complex systems tend to fail in predictable ways. Modern civilization appears strong, but it is built on fragile interconnections. Each system depends on another. Energy supports data, data supports finance, finance supports supply chains. And when one fails, others begin to weaken. Not instantly, but progressively. A chain reaction that accelerates over time, because stability is not independent, it is shared. and shared systems fail together. Not all threats are physical, some are invisible, moving silently through networks. Cyber systems can be disrupted without warning. Financial platforms, communication channels, infrastructure controls, all vulnerable to digital interference. Because the more connected a system becomes, the more entry points it creates. And in a digital world, control can be taken without ever being seen. But perhaps the most critical system is trust. Information shapes perception, and perception shapes reaction. When trust begins to break, confusion replaces clarity. Different narratives compete for attention. Certainty becomes harder to find, and in that uncertainty, decisions become unpredictable because without trust, even stable systems can destabilize. The speed of change is increasing. Events that once took years now unfold in months, sometimes in days. Systems adapt quickly, but not always fast enough, because acceleration introduces instability, and when multiple changes occur simultaneously, systems struggle to keep up. This is not a slow transformation. It is rapid, compressed, and difficult to control. There is always a threshold, a point where systems can no longer recover easily. Before that point, disruptions can be managed. After that point, they begin to compound. One failure amplifies another. Recovery becomes slower, more complex, more uncertain, and eventually, systems reach a stage where stability cannot be restored quickly. This is the point those inside the bunkers are watching for. From the outside, this all appears uncertain, debatable, open to interpretation, but from within these systems, the signals are clearer, patterns align, trends accelerate, and probabilities begin to converge, not into a single event, but into a direction that suggests change is not optional. It is already underway. And for those who can see it, waiting is no longer an option. What makes this moment different is not a single crisis. It is convergence. Multiple systems reaching pressure at the same time, economic instability, resource strain, geopolitical tension, all moving in the same direction. Individually, they are manageable, but together, they amplify each other. And when systems converge under stress, they no longer fail independently, they fail together. Environmental instability adds another layer. Events are becoming more frequent, more intense, more difficult to predict. Infrastructure designed for past conditions struggles to adapt to new extremes. Recovery cycles shorten, pressure accumulates, and systems already under stress are pushed further because resilience requires time, and time is becoming limited. Energy connects everything. Without it, nothing functions. Modern civilization depends on continuous supply, but demand continues to rise, and supply is not always stable. Disruptions in energy systems create immediate impact, because energy is not just one system, it supports all others. And when it becomes unstable, everything else follows. Financial confidence is fragile. It exists as long as people believe it does. But when uncertainty grows, behavior begins to change. People react faster, withdraw quicker, and trust less, because financial systems rely on participation. And when participation shifts suddenly, stability becomes harder to maintain. This is not just about money, it is about belief in the system itself. As pressure increases, societies begin to feel it. Uncertainty spreads through communities. Behavior becomes less predictable. Small disruptions trigger larger reactions. Because stability at scale depends on collective confidence. And when that confidence weakens, systems become harder to manage. Not because they stop functioning, but because people stop trusting them. Control has become centralized. Large systems are managed from fewer locations, efficiency has increased, but so has vulnerability. Because centralized systems create single points of failure, and when those points are targeted, the impact spreads quickly, not gradually, but instantly, because control is concentrated, and concentrated systems carry concentrated risk. Movement begins to slow. Delays increase across systems. Transport networks lose efficiency because disruptions ripple outward. A delay in one region affects another, and over time, these delays compound. Reducing flexibility, reducing response capability, because speed is critical to modern systems, and when speed is lost, so is control. At a certain point, failures begin to cascade, not isolated, but interconnected. One disruption feeds another, and recovery becomes increasingly difficult because systems are no longer failing separately. They are failing together, and when multiple failures overlap, the system becomes unstable as a whole. This is the stage that cannot be reversed quickly. At this stage, the shift becomes psychological. Perception changes. People begin to feel instability. Even if they cannot fully explain it, confidence weakens. Decisions become reactive because uncertainty spreads faster than facts. And once perception shifts, systems respond to that shift because human behavior is part of the system itself. And this is where the difference becomes clear. For most, these signals are confusing, fragmented, uncertain, but for those inside the bunkers, they are aligned, consistent, predictable, a pattern forming across multiple systems, not pointing to a single event, but to a transition, a shift from stability to something else. And that is why they moved underground, not because something might happen, but because they believe it will. When all systems are viewed together, a different picture emerges, not isolated disruptions, but a unified model of instability, each layer connected to another, each risk amplifying the next. This is not chaos, it is structure under pressure, a system reaching its limits, and once those limits are crossed, the transition is no longer gradual, it becomes sudden. The timeline is compressing. Events that once unfolded slowly are now happening closer together. Gaps between disruptions are shrinking. Recovery periods are shorter. Pressure accumulates faster than systems can respond. Because acceleration changes everything, it reduces margin for error. And when systems lose time to recover, they begin to operate under constant stress. This is not just change, it is accelerated change. Stress is no longer occasional, it is continuous. Infrastructure operates closer to capacity. Systems run with less buffer, flexibility decreases, and resilience weakens over time, because constant pressure reduces the ability to absorb shocks. And when a system cannot absorb disruption, it begins to transfer that stress elsewhere, spreading instability across the network. Every system has a threshold, a point where stability can no longer be maintained. Before that point, intervention is possible. After that point, control becomes limited. And when multiple systems approach that threshold, simultaneously, the risk multiplies. Because thresholds do not exist in isolation. They interact, overlap, and reinforce each other until stability can no longer hold. There is a moment, when observation becomes decision, when data is no longer analyzed, but acted upon. And for those inside these bunkers, that moment has already passed. They are no longer preparing. They have already committed, because the signals they observe are no longer ambiguous. They are consistent. And consistency creates certainty. Everything below is now active. Systems operate in full synchronization. Energy flows continuously. Security remains constant. Every component functions as intended. Because this environment is no longer being tested, it is live. A complete system, ready to sustain itself, independent from the outside world, and prepared for whatever comes next. Two realities now exist. Above ground, complexity continues to increase. Uncertainty grows, pressure builds, systems strain. Below ground, everything is controlled, predictable, stable, isolated from disruption, because separation has already occurred, not physically for everyone, but strategically for a few. Inside the bunker, there is no panic, no urgency, only awareness, because the time for preparation has passed, and what remains is acceptance. Acceptance that the world outside is entering a different phase, one that cannot be controlled from within, but can be observed and outlasted. And then, the possibility becomes clear, not of a single event, but of a system-wide shift, a moment when stability breaks and uncertainty takes over. But when that moment comes, these bunkers will not react. They will continue, unchanged, unaffected, because they were never built to survive the world. They were built to exist without it. And in the next phase, the question will no longer be who is prepared, but who is left. At first, it doesn't feel like collapse, just small disruptions, barely noticeable. Lights flicker, signals fail, systems hesitate for a moment, and then continue. But something has changed. The rhythm of normal life begins to break, and beneath that surface, pressure is building. Energy becomes unstable, not completely gone, but inconsistent. Systems that depend on continuous supply begin to adapt under stress. Backup systems activate, emergency protocols engage. But stability is no longer guaranteed because energy is not failing entirely. It is weakening. And weakening systems create uncertainty. Digital systems begin to respond. Connections drop unexpectedly. Transactions fail, communication becomes unreliable. At first, it appears temporary, a glitch, a technical issue. But as failures repeat, a pattern begins to emerge because digital systems depend on stability, and that stability is no longer constant. Awareness spreads quickly. People begin to notice changes. Information flows, but not clearly. Reports vary, details remain uncertain. And in that uncertainty, behavior begins to shift. Questions replace assumptions. Calm begins to fade, because uncertainty creates tension faster than facts. Movement becomes difficult. Traffic builds beyond normal levels. Delays increase. Systems designed for efficiency struggle under pressure, because small disruptions create larger effects in complex systems. And as more systems are affected, coordination becomes harder, not impossible, but increasingly unstable. What becomes clear is not failure itself, but fragility. Systems that appeared stable were operating close to their limits. And under pressure, those limits are reached quickly. One issue leads to another. Not because systems are broken, but because they are interconnected, and interconnected systems share their weaknesses. As disruption spreads, so does emotion. Confusion turns into concern. Concern turns into urgency, and urgency begins to affect behavior. Because people do not respond only to facts, they respond to perception. And when perception shifts toward instability, systems must now manage both technical failure and human reaction. And while disruption grows above, nothing changes below. Systems remain stable. Energy flows without interruption. Life continues as designed. Because this environment was built for exactly this moment, not to react, but to remain unaffected. A controlled system, existing outside the instability above. And as the world begins to feel the pressure, those inside the bunkers are simply watching. At first, it slows down, then it stops completely. Movement disappears from systems designed to never stop. Because once coordination fails, everything begins to stack until nothing can move. This is not just delay, this is system overload. Air travel halts without warning, flights stop mid-schedule. Airports fill with uncertainty, because systems that control movement require precision. And without precision, they shut down completely. This is how large systems fail, not gradually, but instantly. The problem isn't physical, it's digital. Hidden beneath every system are layers of code. And when those layers begin to fail, everything connected to them fails with them. Because modern systems don't collapse alone, they collapse together. Financial systems begin to destabilize. Markets stop behaving predictably. Data becomes unreliable because value depends on trust. And when trust disappears, so does stability. This is not just economic pressure, this is structural breakdown. The public begins to react, not because they understand the system, but because they feel it failing. Access becomes uncertain, supply becomes limited, and uncertainty spreads faster than information. Because people don't wait for explanations, they respond to fear. Behavior changes quickly, order begins to weaken, because systems maintain structure, and when those systems fail, structure disappears with them. This is where the real shift begins. Not in machines, but in people. This is no longer isolated, it's global, multiple systems failing at once, across regions, across continents, because everything is connected. And when connection breaks, failure spreads instantly. This is not a single crisis, it is systemic collapse. And now, control begins to slip, not because no one is trying, but because the system itself is no longer responding. Commands are issued, but nothing changes, because once a system reaches this point, it cannot be controlled, only endured. What began as disruption now accelerates. Failures are no longer isolated. They move across systems, spreading from one area to another. Power grids weaken further. Transport systems lose coordination, and recovery becomes slower with each cycle. Because cascading failures do not reset easily, they compound. And as they compound, control begins to slip. Supply begins to tighten, not because resources disappear instantly, but because access becomes uncertain. People react quickly, purchasing increases. Stock decreases faster than it can be replaced, because supply chains are already under stress. And when demand spikes suddenly, systems struggle to keep up. This is not shortage yet, but it feels like one. Communication becomes unreliable, signals weaken, connections drop. Information becomes fragmented. People search for updates, but clarity is difficult to find. Because communication systems depend on stability, and when that stability weakens, information flow breaks down. Uncertainty grows faster when people cannot see what is happening. At the local level, the shift becomes visible. Daily routines begin to change. Businesses adjust, services slow, movement becomes cautious. Because uncertainty affects decisions, and when decisions change at scale, systems respond accordingly. This is not collapse yet, but it is no longer normal. Control measures begin to increase, authorities respond to maintain stability. Movement is monitored more closely. Access becomes restricted in certain areas. Because maintaining order requires visibility and control. But as systems become more complex, control becomes harder to maintain. Not because of lack of effort, but because conditions are changing faster than systems can adapt. The limits become visible. Systems designed to manage disruption are now managing multiple disruptions at once. Capacity is stretched, attention is divided, and prioritization becomes critical. Because not everything can be stabilized at the same time. Decisions must be made quickly with incomplete information, and every decision carries consequences. Essential resources become focal points: fuel, food, energy. Access becomes more important than availability, because when systems slow, distribution becomes the challenge. And when distribution weakens, localized shortages begin to appear, not everywhere, but enough to create concern. And concern changes behavior quickly. Behavior begins to shift. Calm decisions become reactive. Patience decreases, urgency increases. Because uncertainty affects perception, and perception affects action. Even small disruptions can trigger larger reactions, because people are not responding only to what is happening, but to what they believe might happen next. The shift becomes internal, not just visible in systems, but felt by individuals. Uncertainty becomes personal, decisions become emotional, because stability is not only structural, it is psychological. And when people begin to feel instability, it changes how they respond to everything. This is the moment when the system is no longer just under pressure, it is being experienced as unstable. And beneath the Alps, none of this exists. No shortages, no uncertainty, no disruption. Everything functions exactly as designed, because this environment was built to remain stable, while the world above becomes unstable. A controlled system, separate from the chaos, and as pressure increases above ground, the contrast becomes undeniable. Two realities existing at the same time, one breaking, the other waiting. The cascade reaches its peak. Systems no longer fail in sequence, they fail together. Power grids shut down across entire regions. Transport networks stop moving. Coordination disappears. Because the system has crossed its threshold, recovery is no longer immediate. And stabilization becomes uncertain. This is not disruption anymore, this is breakdown. Then comes the silence, the absence of motion, the absence of noise. Systems that once defined daily life become inactive, because modern civilization is built on constant activity. And when that activity stops, the change is immediate, not gradual, but absolute. A pause that reveals how dependent everything truly was. Without systems, people begin to adapt. Movement becomes slower, more deliberate. Information spreads through direct interaction. Decisions become local, immediate, personal. Because without centralized system, structure shifts, and individuals must navigate uncertainty without the support they once relied on. Resources become visible in a new way, not as systems, but as physical limits. Water, food, energy. Access becomes controlled by availability, and availability becomes uncertain. Because without distribution systems, resources cannot move efficiently. And when movement stops, limitations become immediate. Over time, adaptation begins, not to restore the past, but to navigate the present. New routines form. Expectations adjust, because stability is no longer defined by systems, but by what can be maintained locally. This is not recovery yet, it is transition, a shift into a different way of functioning. Night changes everything. Without consistent power, the darkness returns, visibility decreases, movement slows further, because modern environments were designed with constant illumination, and without it, familiar spaces become unfamiliar. This is not just environmental change, it is psychological. The shift has become absolute. The contrast is now complete. Above ground, instability defines experience. Below ground, stability remains constant. Two completely different realities existing at the same time because one depends on complex systems and the other was designed to operate without them. This is not coincidence. This is separation by design. Two worlds, one choice. Inside the bunker, there is no surprise, no panic, no urgency. Because this scenario was anticipated, prepared for, planned in detail, and now it is unfolding exactly as expected. Because the difference is not luck, it is preparation. In this hidden world, preparedness is the only true power. The system has changed, not suddenly, but completely. What once felt permanent is no longer stable, and what was hidden has become essential. Because beneath the surface, a different structure now exists, one that was built not for the past, but for this moment. And as the world above searches for stability, the final question begins to emerge. Not how this happened, but what comes next. This concludes part 3. The transition has begun.
When the system finally settles and the dust begins to clear, what remains is not chaos, but silence. The noise of constant activity fades, the movement that once defined daily life disappears. And in its place, a slower world begins to emerge. Because once systems stop, what remains is reality without support, unfiltered, unstructured, and unfamiliar. Adaptation begins at the local level. Without centralized systems, people rely on each other. Communities form around necessity. Resources are shared carefully. Skills become more valuable than systems because survival now depends on capability, not convenience. And slowly, a different structure begins to take shape. New systems begin to form, not as complex as before, but functional. Smaller, more localized, more direct, because large-scale systems require stability. And without it, smaller systems take their place. This is not regression, it is restructuring, a shift towards simplicity in response to complexity. Movement begins again, but differently. Slower, more intentional, because uncertainty has changed behavior. Decisions are no longer automatic, they are considered, measured. Because experience has altered perception, and perception now defines how the system rebuilds. With structure comes control. Groups begin to organize around leadership. Access becomes regulated. Movement becomes coordinated, because stability requires management. And management requires authority. This is how systems rebuild, not instantly, but gradually, through organization. Power does not disappear, it transforms. It shifts from large institutions to smaller controlled structures. Because influence follows stability, and those who can provide stability gain control. This is not a new concept, but a new scale, because the system has changed, and power adapts with it. And beneath the Alps, the system never stopped. While the surface adapted, the underground remained stable. And now, connection begins again, but this time on different terms. Because those inside the bunkers are no longer part of the system above. They are in a position to influence it. The balance begins to shift, not suddenly, but strategically. Because control now comes from stability, and stability exists below, not above. This is the moment where influence changes direction, where the future is no longer shaped by what existed before, but by those who remained prepared. Because in a world rebuilding itself, the ones who never lost control will define what comes next. Reconnection does not happen randomly. It follows structure, direction, control. Signals return first, then coordination. Because rebuilding systems requires alignment, and alignment requires leadership. The networks being restored are not the same as before. They are more controlled, more deliberate, and more selective. Control begins to centralize again, but this time with greater precision. Data moves through fewer channels, but with more oversight. Decisions are made faster, but with tighter control, because the previous system allowed too much instability. And now, efficiency is replaced with control, a system designed to prevent collapse. By limiting unpredictability, economic systems begin to return, but not in their original form. Markets reopen, but under supervision. Transactions resume, but with limitations. Because trust must be rebuilt, and rebuilding trust requires control. This is not the old system. It is a redesigned version, one that prioritizes stability over speed. Recovery is structured, not immediate, not uncontrolled. Systems are restored in stages, priorities are defined clearly. Because rebuilding everything at once would risk instability again. So the process is measured, controlled, deliberate, a system being rebuilt with lessons learned from failure. Access becomes selective. Movement is no longer unrestricted. Entry is monitored, regulated, controlled. Because open systems, they created vulnerability, and controlled systems, they create stability. This is the trade-off. Freedom reduced for predictability increased, a different balance between risk and control. Over time, the change becomes permanent. What once felt temporary becomes normal. New routines replace old ones, expectations adjust. Because human systems adapt quickly, and once adaptation stabilizes, the new structure becomes accepted. Not questioned, but lived. The influence becomes clear. Those who remained prepared are now positioned at the center of control, not visible, not public, but effective. Because control does not require visibility, only capability, and capability was preserved underground. This is not takeover, it is transition, from one system to another. And now, a new structure exists. Different from before, but stable, controlled, but functional. Because the world has changed, not destroyed, but restructured. And those who prepared for that change are now part of shaping what comes next. Which leads to the final question. Not about what happened, but about who decides what happens from here. What emerges is not chaos, but structure, a system redesigned around control and stability, where coordination is centralized and execution is precise, because fragmentation created vulnerability, and now integration replaces fragmentation. This is not the old world returning. This is a new system, built from the lessons of collapse. Control flows downward, from centralized systems to localized structures. Instructions move quickly, execution follows immediately. Because efficiency now depends on alignment, and alignment requires direction. This creates consistency, predictability, and control. A system designed to reduce uncertainty. Data becomes the foundation of control. Every interaction, every movement, every decision feeds into a larger system. Patterns are analyzed continuously, outcomes predicted before they occur, because information is no longer passive, it is active, shaping decisions, guiding actions, defining outcomes. Behavior becomes structured, guided, directed, influenced, not through force, but through design, because predictable behavior creates stable systems, and stable systems require consistent input. Instructions move quickly, execution follows immediately, efficiency depends on alignment. This creates consistency, predictability, and control. A system designed to reduce uncertainty. Data becomes the foundation of control. Every interaction, every movement, every decision feeds into a larger system. Patterns are analyzed continuously, outcomes predicted before they occur. Because information is no longer passive, it is active, shaping decisions, guiding actions, defining outcomes. The system is watching, analyzing, predicting, every heartbeat recorded in the new world order. Behavior becomes structured, guided, directed, influenced, not through force, but through design. Because predictable behavior creates stable systems, stability becomes the new priority. And stable systems require consistent input. Control is maintained through precise allocation. This is how control operates, not visibly, but effectively, in the shadows of the old world. The balance has shifted between freedom and stability. Open systems created risk, controlled systems reduce it. But every reduction in risk comes with a cost, because stability requires limitation, and limitation changes how systems function. This is the new equation, one that prioritizes survival over expansion, stability over growth. A world redefined by boundaries, where every entry is a decision and every movement is a record. Adaptation continues. New generations learn within this system. Skills are aligned with structure. Roles are defined clearly. Because long-term stability requires continuity, and continuity depends on adaptation. This is how systems sustain themselves. Preparing individuals for their role in the machine, a seamless integration of man and system. Not through resistance, but through integration. For them, the old world is a myth. The new world is the only truth. Alignment spreads globally. Systems begin to operate in synchronization. Regions coordinate with greater precision. Because fragmentation has been reduced and integration has increased, this creates efficiency, but also dependency. Because now, the system functions as one, and one system requires one direction, unified, absolute, global. And one system requires one direction, unified, absolute, global, in the silence of the new dawn. Over time, acceptance replaces resistance because stability becomes familiar, and familiarity creates comfort. The memory of disruption fades, replaced by predictable routines, society as a machine functioning in perfect rhythm. Because systems shape perception, and perception shapes belief. This is how new structures become permanent. And now, the world above reflects that design, which leads to the final realization. This was never just preparation, it was positioning. For what comes after everything changes. The final evolution of the shift. The system is complete, not as it was before, but as it has become. Stability has returned, but through a different structure. Every element now aligned, every system coordinated, because this world is no longer built on unlimited expansion, but on controlled balance. A system designed not to grow endlessly, but to remain stable. Efficiency through absolute synchronization. The blueprint is live, the world is one, under the oversight of the silent architects. To most, life appears normal again. Movement has returned, systems function, stability feels restored. But control is no longer visible, it operates quietly, in the background, unseen, constant, absolute. Because the most effective systems are the ones you don't notice. And this system was designed to remain unseen. The watchers are the walls, the data is the air, a society built on the silence of oversight. A new generation grows within this system. For them, this is not change, this is normal. Because memory fades, but structure remains, and over time, the past becomes distant, replaced by the present. Because systems do not need to be explained, only experienced, lived, internalized, permanent. The cycle is complete. The transition is forgotten. The order is all that remains in the new era. The shift is now permanent, not temporary, not reversible. Because systems evolve, but they do not return. The world that existed before no longer exists. Replaced by precision, managed by logic. Replaced by something more controlled, more stable, but fundamentally different. A quiet peace. Because change at this scale reshapes everything. The old world is a ghost, the new world is the machine. And here, the purpose becomes clear. These bunkers were never just shelters, they were control centers. Built not to escape the world, but to outlast it. To preserve stability, when stability could no longer exist above. Because survival was only the first step. Control was always the objective, the ultimate goal of the elite. The heart of the new system, beating in the darkness, orchestrating the world from the shadows of the Alps. Everything now moves in alignment, systems respond instantly, coordination is seamless, because control is centralized. Not visible, but effective, and effectiveness is what defines power. The invisible hand of the bunker network. Because in this system, power is not displayed, it is executed, absolute, unquestioned, final. The connection is complete, the grid is absolute, the world is synchronized to the pulse of the underground core. For most, this world feels safer, more stable, more predictable, because uncertainty has been reduced. Risk has been managed, and chaos has been removed, a safe haven built on the foundation of control. But every system has a cost, and every form of stability requires something in return. Sacrifice for security. A quiet sunset over a quiet world. The tension of freedom replaced by the comfort of the machine. So the question is not whether the system works, it does. The question is who it works for. Because stability and control are not the same thing. One is the gift, the other is the chains. And in a world designed for stability, control becomes permanent, not temporary, not optional, but foundational. The final state of the shift. A silence that spans the globe. A world waiting for the next command. Because in the end, they didn't just prepare for the collapse of the system. They didn't just prepare for the shift, they prepared to become the shift. They prepared to become the new global architecture, to become the system. Under the surface, the pulse continues. Complete fade to black. The shift is finished, the new order is here.